Good evening. Thank you very much. Chairman Gallagher, Ranking Member Krishnamurthy, members of the committee. I'm truly grateful for your leadership in addressing, prioritizing the Uyghur genocide. The picture that we're looking at and been hearing is bleak. Millions of Uyghur people are still suffering, and the death count is still unknown. The Chinese government, as noted earlier today, using high-tech tools like biometric scanning, using forced collection of DNA, iris scans, face scans, and voice prints, combined with mobile phone tracking apps, massive network surveillance cameras, the CCP has mobilized AI machine learning for its total control regime. Congress must also ensure full enforcement of the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act. This bill requires global Magnitsky sanction on all entities and officials responsible for the atrocities. To date, only 12 Chinese officials and entities currently under GlobalMax sanctions. This is a pitiful response. We need GlobalMax sanctions on all the Chinese high-tech giants that are maintaining genocide that tech built. Making these companies no-go zone is long overdue. I urge this committee to focus on China's transnational repression. It is past time to strengthen government authorities to defend U.S. sovereignty and civil liberties under our Constitution. Tonight, I will speak only to my own case as a Uyghur American. Chinese officials have continued to prevent me from seeing my mother, despite involvement by senior officials, including Secretary Blinken and Ambassador Burns. It is extremely painful to say this, but it is unlikely that I will see my mother again in this life. In fact, my father and I said goodbyes, along with my mother at the time, that when the Chinese government, CCP, started rounding up Uyghur intellectuals and families with foreign contacts. My late father even told me that he wished he died earlier so that he could left this world with good memories. I urge the committee to address China's massive program of state-imposed forced labor that we can discuss a little bit later. Tonight, you have heard from two brave women. I salute the courage of these two ladies that I call friend, as well as other survivors who borne witness from the inside camps. I have 27 recommendations that you can look at. In closing, I wanted to thank the committee. Crimes against humanity cannot be treated merely as an area of disengagement or disagreement, worse yet, an irritant in a bilateral relationship. This is truly more than a competition. It is a battle for the world, and our children will inherit it. Genocide is defined as an international crime for a reason. Confronting is not an option. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Chair Turkel, similar question. In your written statement, I was struck when you noted that numerous publicly traded Chinese tech companies are included in many emerging market indexes that are held by public pension funds, university endowments, individual retirement plans, and investment portfolios. What role does American capital play in subsidizing the ongoing genocide? And should tax-advantaged entities like pension funds or university endowments continue to enjoy that status if they are invested in, even if passively, companies that contribute to the genocide?
Chairman Gallagher, that's an important question acting on that issue is long overdue. This is happening two ways. The American people, us consumers, continue to fuel this genocide through our purchase of the tainted products. We're talking about more than 80 global brands. At the same time, as you eloquently pointed out in the last hearing, that we are investing in not only self-destruction, but also fueling this genocide, the ongoing genocide that is in its 7th year. Genocide should never happen, let alone being continued for 7 years. And also, this is very un-American, that corporate America, as you may recall, when the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act being considered late 2021, U.S. Chamber of Commerce and others were opposing. They lobbied against. That has to stop. What we can do is to not only put them in a reputational risk category, we need to make it criminal, create criminal consequences for them. Just like the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act that considers corrupt practices as a criminal act that is handled through law enforcement at the SEC and at the Justice Department. So unless you make it difficult, enhancing some legal tools and making it not only immoral and reputational risk for them, but also face consequences, then we might be able to stop this. It's un-American, it's immoral, it's unconscionable practice that is still ongoing.
Just a quick follow-up specifically on the university endowments and pension funds and tax-advantaged entities. Should they enjoy that status that they continue?
They should not enjoy that status.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Turkel, thank you. Mr. Turkel, this morning the CEO of TikTok, Mr. Chu, was questioned at a hearing before Congress. And at that time, actually, my colleague, Dr. Dunn, cited reports of basically TikTok data being used to surveil Forbes journalists. And Mr. Chu said this was not spying on those journalists. Can you please tell us your opinion about what he said?
Well, that's what they do. When you look at their practices, starting from ByteDance. ByteDance has a strategic partnership with Chinese Ministry of Public Security. That's part of their business conduct. When you look at the way that they built this camp system, initially they relied on something called Integrated Joint Operating Platform. That joint operating platform used the data from the WeChat and Douyin to build
Douyin is the
Chinese version of the
TikTok.
Yes. So that's, a lot of Uyghur people to this day don't even know why they're in the camp, why their loved ones in the camp. Because of this platforms, tracing are part of the Chinese government. Even today, there are representatives in Washington engaging in genocide denial. If you listen to the interview with the top lobbyists for the company last year with Jake Tapper on CNN, he could not even acknowledge that there's a genocide in China. That speaks the volume. A couple of thoughts on this. One is a global aspect. For example, European countries in EU, Germany, Italy, for example, need to step up to the plate. They can, and countries as Naomi pointed out, Canada, UK, and others that have a similar type of legal tools as we do, such as Global Magnitsky Act, they need to use it. And also domestically, as I noted in my opening remarks, Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act need to be fully implemented. To date, we only went after 10, we announced 10 Global sanctions. That should be expanded to the banks, for financial transactions. That should be expanded to the network. We also need to put pressure on the business community, the high-tech community, Silicon Valley to be exact. They're finding ways to still sharing technology, still providing hardware, software support. We need to close the loopholes, and this committee can do that.
Very good. Thank you. Dr. Zanz?
Mr. Luchtemar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all the witnesses for your compelling testimony and sacrifice to be here and all the background you're giving us this evening. It's very, very vital to us. One of the numbers that has come across my desk is that in order for the Chinese Communist Party, i.e. government, to continue to oppress their people, to surveil them, detain them, and put them in detention camps, it takes about $300 billion a year. Is that a figure that you've heard before, could verify at all? Dr. Zenz, perhaps? Mr. Turkel? Is it close? Do you have an idea?
I think that figure is close. Here's why I think it's a reasonable number. When you look back, the time that they start building those over 400 camps and installing those cameras, they invested zillions of dollars, and now that's become a political economy. This is why they've been aggressively exporting their digital surveillance equipment. We're talking about more than 80 countries around the world, that includes some democratic nations, adopting the Chinese surveillance. And also the exportation of slave labor-produced products, also part of their political.
You made my point. Thank you very much for that. The point is that it takes billions of dollars a year for them to do this. And where do they get the money from? This is a concern, and in your testimony, Mr. Turkel, you indicate and name names, which thank you for that, because I think it's time we start naming names of companies that do business, companies that fund these people, and companies that are engaging and supporting this type of activity. You named Vanguard, BlackRock, HSBC, Fidelity, and other pension funds. I can tell you from being on the Financial Services Committee, the CEO of BlackRock recently made the comment that the best place to invest the next 20 years is China. That can't happen, but it is happening, and those guys should be responsible, as you just said a while ago, for that sort of activity. So by naming those folks, how are they getting those dollars into the to these different companies over there that are helping with the atrocities?
They raise funds. One of those companies in the midst of pandemic was bragging about raising $140 million in China, just China alone. Ray Dalio, he was publicly acknowledging that his business is thriving. And also hedge funds, venture capitalist firms in Silicon Valley are still making zillions of dollars.
You know, one of the things back in 2020, there were 1,000 Chinese companies on our stock exchange. And then we invested, United States invested $1 trillion in those companies. Right. $1 trillion. We put in place a provision that said they had to be audited every 2 years, because many of them are shell companies, and they're just running the money through those companies into the government. And that alone knocked almost 3/4 of those companies off the list. So as of January 9th, that list is 252. But we're still investing in the company, in this country. Our trade deficit's $383 billion. That's enough to keep the government funded to be able to detain and oppress their own people. How do you get the message across the American people that we've got to stop looking to Chinese products? We've got to start looking for our own, be willing to pay an extra $1 or $2 or $10, whatever it is, for an American-made product or a product made somewhere else in the world versus that of a Chinese-produced product.
Borrowing a quotable line from Undersecretary Silvers, I believe forced labor is a cancer on value. American people need to stop purchasing knowingly. Now everything we touch, solar panels, pharmaceuticals, PPEs, beauty products. As you may have seen, CNN reported the Uyghur woman hair products being sold. 13 tons of hair products were seized by the CCP. How many shipments did we miss? What else that I've been sending? And they label these products as black gold. People need to know that we are complicit in the ongoing genocide.
One quick more question. I notice you come in here with the International Finance Corporation, which is a development arm of the World Bank. Yep. It allows China access to their funds. And technically, in order to be able to do that, they are supposed to be a developing nation, which they are no way that they're there at this point. How would you suggest us to fix that problem?
The World Bank and IFC have been funding entities that are building those camps. Years ago,
they are funding the entities that are directly building these camps. Is that what
there is an entity called XPCC, Xinjiang Production Construction Corps, that were using funds from the World Bank. There were hearings held in the United States Congress years ago. People didn't pay attention to it. And this is the entity that the US government sanctioned on the Global Magnitsky Act, and also largely responsible for the ongoing forced labor practices.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'll yield back.
Mr. Turkel, could you describe for us what it is like to walk around the city of Xinjiang, surrounded by this technology of repression? How frequently do Uyghur residents encounter security cameras, checkpoints? What happens at those checkpoints?
It is a total controlled police state, Leninist police state. Now it has got to the point of the Uyghur homes having QR codes on the door. The government could track, who lives there, what kind of family history, travel history, family connection. They also forcibly install spying apps on the mobile phones. This is precisely why our fellow Americans here in the United States even cannot comfortably contact their family members out of concern that one phone call, one text message, one video chat may end up causing them trouble, if not straight to the concentration camps. On this note, I want to also mention something that the US government didn't get much media attention. Late 2021, US Commerce Department added to the entity list of a military medical academy and its 11 affiliates for developing brain control weaponry. That has not attracted enough attention. Commerce Secretary specifically said that weapon to be used on ethno-religious groups. So that gives you an idea what kind of totalitarian state that we're talking about.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Barr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And tonight's testimony about the genocide of the Uyghur people, the mass internment the rape, the torture, the sexual abuse, the forced sterilization, the forced abortions, the heartbreaking forced separation of parents from children, the psychological abuse and coercion, all of these human rights atrocities point to the urgent need for moral and intellectual clarity. What we do not need is nuance or ambiguity. We must face the truth that there is a very real struggle between religious tolerance and an evil, toxic intolerance by the CCP, a paranoid depravity that says that if you are a religious minority or a person of faith who fails to conform with the CCP's rigid party-state ideology, then you must be destroyed. This CCP ideology of evil, extreme religious intolerance, and immoral disregard for basic human rights must be confronted, and we must impose costs, as Dr. Zenz testifies. Because the longer it's not confronted, the more the CCP will be emboldened and the more lives will be shattered. So tonight, let's affirm the objective superiority of U.S. Western values of individual freedom and dignity, religious liberty, freedom of conscience, and political democracy over the repressive features of Chinese communism and the CCP's brutal surveillance state totalitarianism. As many of us are aware, the People's Republic of China was elected to the United Nations Human Rights Council. According to the United Nations, the Human Rights Council is, quote, responsible for strengthening the promotion and protection of human rights around the globe and for addressing situations of human rights violations. To any of our witnesses, what message does it send to the Uyghur people and to other oppressed groups around the globe that China continues to hold a seat on the United Nations Human Rights Council?
It sends a very disturbing message, to say the least. We have seen time and time again, most recently, there was a motion to debate on the Human Rights High Commissioner's report on the Xinjiang government's genocide of the Uyghurs. We could not even secure 19 votes, so the other side won. So it's a place for the Chinese government to abuse its seat. That's just one piece of it.
And to you, Mr. Turkel, and also in your testimony, I was very surprised. I'm sure you're right that all these things are still coming from the Uyghur region, because I would have assumed that the Forced Labor Act would have prevented that. Is that just not being enforced, or how are all these products
Here's the
coming
good
in?
news. This is not a lost cause. We are, even though this genocide is still underway, still we don't know how many people being detained and died. We're seeing some progress. Just today in the news that more than 50% of 900 American companies being surveyed in Beijing, in China, said they're not in favor of investing in China. So that's a good news. And also, a couple of years ago, Washington Post reported that one major yarn supplier were kind of complaining in their stock exchange report that they lost significant amount of money. On the economic side, yes. But on the political side, in a bilateral, multilateral aspect, no. So if you can, there's a back and forth. Some days we hear strong positions, strong statements. Some days we hear lukewarm responses and statements. And if we have been doing this alone, this has to be a global endeavor. That way we might be able to be able to help in a certain way.
Chair Turkel, your testimony highlights the danger posed by university research collaboration with Chinese entities that may facilitate advances in surveillance technology. Yeah. What obligations would you say do foreign universities owe the Uyghur people to ensure that joint research does not contribute to the ongoing genocide? At the very least, should the U.S. government ensure that federal research dollars do not go to entities in China that may contribute to the genocide, the PLA advances, or other human rights in China?
Certainly. There are a number of issues involving our universities. One is research, as you alluded. The other one is self-centering. We're not hearing the vocal China scholars today publicly condemning, for the most part, except for several Xinjiang scholars, or Uyghur scholars, still self-censoring. They're sometimes just disturbingly echo CCP propaganda. And also, One other point to your research-related questions. A few years ago, there was a professor at Yale Medical School, Kenneth Kidd, was implicated, being widely reported for him bringing in a lab assistant from China's Ministry of Public Security to conduct research on Uyghur DNA. So that gives you an idea what kind of problems that we have. We're talking about university endowments, but we have research projects that have been aiding and abetting some of the stated goals of the CCP government. That includes scientific research, that includes technological engineering field, that also includes biomedical research. That needs to stop.
Well, thank you very much. And again, thanks to all of you for your testimony this evening.
Mr. Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for coming and sharing this very powerful testimony. And we would be doing a great disservice to your courage and bravery if we don't come out of this with some concrete steps and actions that we can take to move forward. Mr. Turkel, I wanted to start with you. You laid out some very specific proposals in your testimony, laying out some steps that the Secretary of State and other senior officials can do more going forward, or increasing diplomatic efforts to nations hosting Uyghurs or other Muslim-majority nations. You even mentioned this idea of a State Department China regional office program expansion. Can you talk a little bit more about the important role that State Department and diplomacy can make here?
Yes, first of all, Congressman Kim, thank you for asking that question. First of all, we have to elevate human rights in our dialogue with Beijing. They elevated human rights, religious freedom issues as part of their pushback against Western influence starting 2014. That have been integrated into Chinese national security strategy. Where are we? We're still making human rights, religious freedom, individual freedom, press freedom a kind of a secondary issue. That needs to change. Two, we need to revisit our strategies, specifically communication strategies. We have to continue to call it genocide. It's a U.S. policy. Two successive administrations and this Congress recognizes a genocide along with our partners and allies in the Western democracy, including Taiwan. So we have to call it genocide, crimes against humanity. That message needs to be repeated every day. And then three, we have to engage like-minded governments, even the governments that are lukewarm. I do a fair amount of international travel as part of the China regional China officers program. We have only 19 around the world. Each officer has about $50,000 budget. That need to be increased.
Yeah.
In your view, what should some of the immediate next steps be for the Congress to take? Is it looking at the sectors currently labeled as high priority by the Department of Homeland Security and considering new sectors that should be added? Or are there other steps that should be taken first?
Three things. One, thank you for the question. First, we need to have a full briefing. This committee could organize a full briefing on the obstacles to fully implement this significant law. And then two, we need to close the black hole as part of the USMCA agreement that bans forced labor-produced products. But the Xinjiang exports are still making it to the United States, reportedly through Mexico and Canada. So that needs to be addressed. And then also Europe has been a dumping ground. There's no national or European Parliament, European Union level of engagement or policy responses have been announced. A couple of years ago, there was a report published by USCIS. It reported Italy in the year 2019-2020, the export volume to Italy from Xinjiang doubled. So we have Europe being still one of the continued destination for. So we have to get into get Europeans and other allies, even including Japan, including Australia, to essentially do something that this Congress did.
Thank you as well, Mr. Turkel. Again, horrible to hear you may never see your parents again. And the courage that you've shown as well, it really, I think, humbles all of us here tonight. So thank you. We heard tonight some testimony about the Chinese TikTok company and how they have participated in the surveillance architecture of the state and have been complicit in the genocide taking place against the Uyghurs. And yet, at a hearing earlier today, when TikTok's CEO Chu was asked about this. He said, quote, "I'm here to discuss TikTok and what we do as a platform." It seems as if a more complete answer would have included what TikTok does as a platform to help architect the surveillance state, which has been involved in these atrocities. But it's not TikTok alone. We know that Chinese technology companies, many of which still do business here in the United States, are providing surveillance and tracking technology that not only enable the surveillance state in China, but also for would-be autocrats across the world. So Representative Pfluger and I have legislation, the Uyghur Human Rights Sanctions Review Act, that would give President Biden the authority to sanction these companies under the Global Magnitsky Act, and I think my colleagues on this committee could be instrumental in getting that legislation across the finish line, and that's something I will work to do along with them. We have taken steps, important steps, as we've heard, like the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, to boost incentives to reshore our supply chains and reward those companies that do the right thing. But we all know tonight more must be done, and I look forward to working with the members of this committee to finish that work. So, given the secrecy of Beijing's human rights abuses in Xinjiang and the difficulty in finding information on the labor used to produce goods for export, how can the U.S. government, how can we do better at making sure we are further boosting insights into how certain products are made in China and making sure that we have a supply chain that does not involve labor from Xinjiang or exporting that through third-party countries back into the United States? And Mr. Turkel, Mr. Zentz, if you'd like to reply.
First of all, Congresswoman, thank you so much for your sympathy with my family situation. I wish this circumstances will change, and I will welcome my mother back to the United States to meet her American children and American grandchildren. She has 5 U.S.-born grandchildren, but she only met 1 so far. It's painful. It's extremely painful. To your question, a couple of things need to be taken into consideration. One, as I alluded earlier, this bill has faced some challenges. It is almost disturbing to hear the folks who are advocating cooperation with China on climate crisis wanted to water this down. That's a wrong approach. Laws made to be implemented. We need to fully implement this law. And then the other thing that we need to look into is close the loopholes within China. We've been receiving news regarding human trafficking, transporting Uyghur workers to inland China. We're also hearing change of labels, country of origin. Technology should be able to address that. I recently spoke at the Tech Expo organized by CBP. They're talking about using DNA technology to trace. So technology and also consumer advocacy is also very important.
The gross deception that comes from a leader whose actions in Xinjiang, our own State Department across multiple administrations has determined to constitute crimes against humanity and genocide. Mr. Turkel, do you have any reflections on why President Xi would be in Moscow working to align himself with Mr. Putin at this time, in this moment, even as we're having this conversation here this evening?
So from just observing the meeting and news reports, he wants to tell the Chinese people that he is still welcomed as a key international player by showing up there. Previously to Central Asia, as you may recall, that he received highest state honor in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, despite the fact that the Kazakhs and the Uyghurs, so as Uzbeks, essentially from the same family. So that he wants to show to the domestic audience that he is still a player in the international community. As you know, the Chinese government has been somewhat isolated in the last few years. And then two, he wants to to find a way to improve China's economic condition. They are not doing well. So those are the two observations. And also, before Putin's reinvasion of Ukraine, as you may recall, last February, they signed almost unconditional love letter. So that need to be displayed. So that's my take on the visit.
Yeah, and it's certainly exceptional and profound to have Ms. Hadawachi and Ms. Siddiq testifying before us here in Women's History Month on the atrocities that are taking place in these labor camps. And as we saw on the eve of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we were able to decouple to an extreme extent from Russia. We were able to break off ties. And something our committee is wrestling with is this economic consideration. And we are well aware, based on tonight's hearing, more so aware of the Forced Labor Prevention Act, creating the presumption that goods produced or manufactured in Xinjiang or by entities with certain ties to Xinjiang that are made with forced labor unless determined otherwise. And we need to figure out, and I'm wondering, Mr. Turkel, if you could help us to identify the potential vulnerabilities in the existing law that allow the CCP to get their exports around this Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act.
One of the things in that has not been helpful is the $800 de minimis that need to be addressed. Because of that, some of the consumer products are still available. Just to search.
A lot of things cost less than $800.
Yeah, DJI, and on Amazon, you will get at least 3 dozen hits. That is a sanctioned company because the drone is apparently less than $800. So we have to close as simple loopholes as that. And also, I genuinely want the business community to do some soul checking here. We need to tell them, not on my name. We are complicit in this because of, and this is the same business community just repeating, making us feel that we're seeing IBM 2.0.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing that we haven't talked a whole lot about tonight is the why. Why does the CCP round up and persecute the Uyghurs? Mr. Turkel, is it merely or entirely because of their religion, their Muslim faith?
To the Chinese government, stability is a paramount concern. Starting 2012, 2013, all the way to 2014, they identify liberalism, Islamism, or Western religion, foreign religion, Western influence, posing an existential threat to the CCP leadership. So in order to do that, in order to tackle that problem, they come up with this preemptive policing. So the way that they're describing the religion in particular, like likening it to thought virus, infectious disease, is very telling. So to the CCP government, the Uyghur people's ethno-religious identity is a virus that will impact, that will become a bigger problem if the Uyghurs remain to be a distinct ethno-religious group. Same thing is happening, similar thing is happening to the Tibetan people, but the most vulnerable community under that, the Western influence pushback effort is the Christians and Muslims. So that shows to the Chinese a sign of disloyalty and potential political threat.
As you know, earlier today, the CEO of TikTok appeared before a congressional committee. After the committee, his COO, one of his top executives, said that the criticism of TikTok coming from members of Congress on both sides of the aisle was rooted in xenophobia. One congressman, Jamal Bowman, even went as far to agree and said it's racist to suggest that we would ban TikTok or to attack TikTok. I wonder, Mr. Turkel, is it a strategy of the Chinese Communist Party to deflect criticism by calling that criticism racist, or to talk about Asian American hate, or to use that type of rhetoric and innuendo to deflect criticism overall?
Certainly. They're also taking advantage of American ignorance. They're just presenting something available on App Store that you can download and watch short videos, but they're missing the point. It's intoxicating American minds of the American youth through the fake news, through disinformation. Just case in point, genocide denial. The guy that I alluded earlier could not even acknowledge that this government he's affiliated with through his job is committing genocide. So American people need to know this company is one of the biggest facilitators, enablers of the ongoing genocide.
Yeah, and it's not helpful to use that type of rhetoric, right? I mean, it diminishes the whole point of speaking out against genocide and doing something about it. You would agree with that?
Yeah.
Would you say that the Biden administration has downplayed Uyghur genocide?
To Biden administration's credit, starting from 2020, there are a number of significant decisions were made. For example, acknowledging the previous administration's genocide determination was a huge relief for a lot of us. And also something significantly done was the coordinated sanctions in March 2021 with Canada, UK, and European Union. That should be the new norm. I would like to see that. And I also would like to see the Biden administration continue to raise this as it did in 2021 at the G7. But what is not acceptable today is that some officials in the Biden administration trying to tone down human rights criticism on China's ongoing genocide to get a Chinese cooperation in the climate crisis. But we're not seeing this issue on the same page. Climate crisis is not a top priority for the Chinese government. They will do what is best for them, what serves their interests, the leadership and Communist Party, not because of our urging.
Can you speak to any specific incidents of, or examples of the State Department backing off, confronting China?
State Department has not do that yet, but I'm just troubled by some of the comments made by Special Envoy John Kerry. The comments made by Energy Secretary recently complimenting China's investment in green technology. They steal, they subsidize, they use dirty coal, and they enslave human beings. What kind of green technology investment that we're talking about?
On the subject of governments doing more, Mr. Turkel, you had mentioned the Human Rights Council vote 19-17 in the fall to prevent even discussion, much less action, on the report on the abuse of the Uyghur people. I'll note that Brazil, India, and Mexico all abstained under pressure from the CCP. What can U.S. diplomats do to convince these rising powers of the global South that their voice is necessary in standing up to the CCP?
Just quickly, we need to have a special envoy. This is a full-time job. I think there's a strong coordination required within our government, interagency, intergovernmental efforts. This has to be an office level, special envoy level of task so that people will take us seriously.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Mr. Turkel, is it accurate to say that these surveillance tools, as the Chinese Communist Party perfects them by using them to repress the Uyghur people, could be used to surveil Americans?
Absolutely. That's one of the effective tools that they will use to make us, to compromise our personal information privacy and also threaten our sovereignty. You know, they will also affect the democratic norms. We're already seeing the signs in Zimbabwe and in countries that they're using Huawei-provided technology to monitor opposition leaders. That would be the new norm that China is trying to create.
Chair Turkel, earlier you talked about Uyghur people being forced to put apps that spy on their devices. I would let everyone know, some of you probably already know, that TikTok has changed its U.S. privacy policy, allowing the app to automatically collect new types of biometric data, including what it describes as face prints and voice prints. Chair Turkel, is it possible that these kind of high-tech surveillance tools are already on American phones?
Yes, that's a spying tool for the Chinese state. They can collect data all around, personal videos, pictures, communications. People argue that our social media companies do that as well, but that's for commercial purpose. But what the Chinese doing it for national security or whatever the data that they have is a valuable data for advancing their AI technology.
And so, Mr. Turkel, do you believe, as I do, that the United States, as the leader of the free world, must commit ourselves to building a multilateral coalition aimed at stopping the Uyghur genocide?
Absolutely. You know, to your earlier point, words matter. There's a reason to call this genocide. Once we call it, the next step under the Article 1 of the Genocide Conventions is to stop it. And then hold those perpetrators to account. More than 150 countries around the world are state party to the Genocide Convention. Only 10, including some parliaments, our government, give a proper name to this crime. It's a genocide. It's crime against humanity. It is past time for action. Again, as I said, this has been ongoing genocide in the last 6-7 years.
And so what American companies are actually profiting from the suffering of the Uyghur people?
The companies that have been in the news includes Nike, Coca-Cola, Intel, and some of the solar panel manufacturers. And also some European companies like Siemens, Volkswagen, as I noted earlier. So there we're talking about more than 80 global brands. It's a large number. This is precisely, this is part of the reason that with the UFLPA, we have not been able to stop the forced labor practices in China.
How are they able to skirt any laws that prohibit the use of forced labor, et cetera, and still operate and sell their products in the United States?
A couple of years, I think it was last year, or late 2021, CECC held a hearing. They had business representatives, American multinational corporation representatives, and none of them even willing to acknowledge that there's human rights abuses against the Uyghur people. This was on the record that anyone can go and watch on the CECC YouTube channel.